Brent, you rat, you smiled while you signed away our future. They said it like a punchline. We are giving the money to Brent, Dad announced as if he'd just read the weather. Now get out, you're fired. The air in the conference room grew thin, the kind of quiet that waits politely for an explosion that never comes. I didn't shout, I didn't throw anything. I sat very still and watched them perform the betrayal like it was a family play they'd practiced for years. Mom laughed the laugh she always uses when she wants to pretend she's above the mess. Brent clapped his hands once, soft and certain as if applause could seal a deed. For a moment, the world rearranged itself into two columns, the people who thought I was dust and the handful who knew the light would come back on. I let them choose their side. I kept my voice low, my face a ledger of things unspent. Fine, I said, and it sounded like the last sound in a movie before the credits start, calm, clipped, full of meaning they didn't bother to read. If you're into slow burn stuff, stick around and hit subscribe. I promise this isn't the end, it's the quiet before a whole different kind of storm. They told me the patent was worthless. They told me the company was a sinking ship no one could save. They told the lawyers to stand up and sign the forms like grave markers. When the lawyers stood, they looked like men who'd seen 100 small tragedies and learned to make them legal. Brent's tie had a knot full of confidence. Dad's hand trembled only once when he slid the envelope across the polished table. Mom kept smiling, the kind of smile that costs less than the truth. I stared at the envelope for a long time. It was heavier than the look on Brent's face. It had weight because it carried other people's denial. They'd sold the patent of my idea like it was a lamp they were tired of dusting. I'd sketched that idea on a napkin in the garage at 2 in the morning and stayed up learning the language to make it real. But none of that counts when someone with a louder voice decides your work is a footnote. They expected me to fall apart. They expected me to storm out, dramatic and loud, the kind of scene that would let them sleep at night. They wanted witnesses who could testify that I'd been dramatic, emotional, unstable. What they didn't expect was how boringly rational I could be. I collected my things with care, one folder at a time, every paper a quiet promise that I was keeping score. There are a lot of ways people lose more than money in moments like this. Pride gets pawned off for comfort. Names change on paper and suddenly your history has a new author. But I'd learned not to gamble on moments that demanded theater. You don't beat people like Brent with theatrics. You beat them by building things they can't take away and by being patient enough to let their own lies trip them. As I walked out, neighbors in the lobby bowed their heads or stared the other way, the exact mix of shame and relief I'd seen in small towns when someone finally does what they always suspected. I kept my pace slow. I didn't slam the door. I left it open because I wanted them to hear the way the hallway swallowed their celebration. You should know right now, I'm not the type to chase revenge for the television cameras. I'm the kind who makes a plan so surgical it looks accidental. I collect details like other people collect stamps, patiently, methodically, without fuss. And I watch. People like Brent always reveal themselves eventually. They talk too loud, they spend too much on appearances, and they copy courage from others without learning how to stand in it. Tonight, they'll sleep with the money in their accounts and the lawyer's signatures like a security blanket. Tomorrow, I start asking soft questions that aren't really questions at all. Quiet things, small moves, a lunch here, a call there, a note left at the right time. Watch lists and ledgers, emails and receipts, the kind of paperwork that sounds boring but tells stories if you know how to read it. So I get in my car and drive off. Not angry, not plotting fireworks, just driving with a purpose that looks from the outside like calm. They think they've bought peace with a check. They think I'm out. They think the story ends here. I go after I'm fired and why the garage where I used to tinker became a better boardroom than theirs. I grew up in a town where everybody knew your business before you did. 1 stoplight, 2 diners. A high school football field that people treated like a cathedral. If you sneezed on Monday, by Wednesday someone's aunt would be praying for your condition like you'd been placed on life support. That's the kind of place it was. Small. Tight, friendly on the surface, and ruthless underneath. My family had a name there, not a famous name, not a rich name, just the kind of name people recognized because my dad always made sure he was seen. He coached Little League for a couple seasons, donated money to church events, shook hands like it was his second job. He didn't have a lot, but he knew how to look like he did. And then there was Brent. Brent was the family's golden boy the moment he learned to smile on command. He was 2 years older than me, tall, loud, and always dressed like he had somewhere important to be, even when he didn't. Teachers loved him because he made jokes that didn't cross the line. Neighbors loved him because he'd hold doors open and say, "Yes, ma'am," like he was auditioning for something. And my parents? They loved him because he made them feel like they were winning at life. Me, I was the quiet one, the good kid, the one who didn't cause problems, which sounds like a compliment until you realize what it really means. Nobody looks at you twice. When Brent got a B, Dad would say, "That's my boy, you're doing great." When I got straight A's, Mom would say, "Well, that's expected." Expected. Like I was a machine that didn't deserve applause because I was built to perform. Brent got pep talks, Brent got second chances, Brent got new shoes for football season even when money was tight. I got "you'll be fine." I learned early that being overlooked could either break you or sharpen you, so I sharpened. While Brent was out collecting attention, I was collecting skills. I worked at the grocery store after school not because I needed the money but because I wanted independence. I stocked shelves and listened. People talk when they think you're invisible. They tell you everything. I learned who was cheating on who was faking their business success, who owed money, who had secrets hidden behind a perfect front porch and a friendly wave. That town raised me like a spy. At night, I'd go home and sit at the kitchen table with a cheap laptop that sounded like it was coughing when it turned on. I didn't have fancy tutors or some inspiring mentor. I had YouTube videos, library books, and pure stubbornness. I got into tech because it made sense to me, not just computers, systems, the way one small piece could change everything. The way a smart design could save time, save money, save people from mistakes. I liked the idea of building something that didn't care who your parents were or what your last name meant, something that worked because it worked. My first invention wasn't some big dramatic thing. It was a simple workflow tool for small businesses, a way to track inventory and automate orders without hiring extra help. Nothing flashy, just practical. But when I tested it at the grocery store, the manager looked at me like I just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "This could save me hours," he said. That moment hit me hard. Because for the first time, someone didn't see me as the quiet daughter, they saw me as valuable, so I kept going. I built more, improved it, protected it, filed paperwork, learned patents the way other girls learned makeup tutorials. I didn't tell my parents much, not because I didn't want them to be proud, because I already knew they wouldn't be. Brent would have laughed, Dad would have shrugged, Mom would have told me to not get my hopes up, and honestly, keeping it to myself felt safer. Then life did what it always does in small towns, it tightened its grip. Dad started talking about the family business more and more. He wanted us to look like a success story. Something shiny the town could admire. Brent played the role perfectly. He strutted around like a future CEO, like he was born with a company in his pocket. Meanwhile, I was building something real. And that's the part that still makes me smile today, because the company they sold in that conference room, it didn't start with Brent. It didn't start with Dad. It started with me in a garage with a laptop that barely worked and a girl everyone underestimated. How Brent got his hands on my work and why I let him think he was the genius. Brent didn't steal my idea with a mask and a crowbar, he stole it with compliments. It started the year I came back home after finishing my certification program and a few contract jobs out of town. I didn't move back because I failed. I moved back because I had a plan, a real one. The kind of plan you build quietly when nobody's cheering for you anyway. My parents thought I came back because I missed them. Brent thought I came back because I was lost. Truth was, I came back because small towns are perfect for testing big ideas. Businesses there don't have fancy teams or huge budgets. They have one owner doing 10 jobs and praying nothing breaks. If you can build something that works for them, you can build something that works anywhere. I started visiting local businesses one by one, a tire shop, a bakery, a hardware store. A tiny trucking company run by a man named Roy who looked like he'd been tired since 1998. I'd sit with them, listen to what they needed, and then I'd build solutions that made their lives easier. It wasn't glamorous. No ribbon cuttings, no applause, just results, and those results started spreading, not because I advertised, because in a town like that word travels faster than Wi-Fi. Soon enough, my dad started hearing it. At first, he acted like it was nothing. "Oh, look at you," he said one night at dinner, half smiling like he was humoring a kid. "You're doing your little computer thing." My mom nodded like she'd always believed in me, even though she'd never once asked what I was working on. Brent just leaned back in his chair, chewing like he was bored. "That's cute," he said, "but are you making real money?" I didn't answer because the truth was yes, I was, not millions, not yet. But enough that I could have left town again any time I wanted. Enough that I didn't need their approval, enough that my work had weight. And then Dad came to me with that tone. The business tone, the one he used when he wanted something but didn't want to admit it. "So," he said, clearing his throat like he was about to announce a new law, "Brent and I have been talking. We think it's time we start something bigger, a family company." I almost laughed, not because the idea was bad, but because of who he said it with, Brent, the same guy who couldn't keep a job longer than a season without blaming the manager. The same guy who once got fired from the car dealership because he kept accidentally losing paperwork, but Dad said it like Brent was a future legend. And the worst part, he didn't ask me to be part of it, he told me. "You can help," Dad said, waving his fork like it was a contract. "You've got the tech skills, Brent's got the people skills, perfect combo." Brent smiled like he'd just won something. I didn't correct them, not yet. Because in my head, I saw something they didn't. Opportunity. If I played this right, I could use their hunger for attention to fund my work, scale my product, and lock everything down legally. So I nodded and said, "Sure." Brent clapped me on the shoulder like I was his assistant. "That's what I'm talking about," he said. "We're gonna build something huge." I let him believe that. We formed the company fast. Dad insisted on using the family name. He wanted it to look respectable. Brent wanted it to look expensive. I wanted it to be protected. I handled the systems, the product, the structure. Brent handled talking, and he talked a lot. He walked into meetings like he owned the building. He wore suits that didn't fit quite right and shook hands like he was running for office. He told everyone he was the vision guy. Meanwhile, I was in the background, quietly building the actual vision. The first time we pitched to a potential investor, Brent did his whole performance. He paced, smiled, joked, threw out buzzwords like innovation and scalability. Then he clicked to the demo, my software. My brain on the screen, and the investor's eyes lit up. "Who built this?" the man asked. Brent didn't even blink. "We did," he said smoothly. "It's a family operation." I watched that moment like it was slow motion, because that right there, that was the first real theft, not the patent papers, not the money, the credit. And once someone steals credit and gets away with it, they don't stop, they get addicted. After that, Brent started introducing me as our tech girl, not co-founder. Not inventor, tech girl, like I was a helper, not the engine. Dad didn't correct him, Mom didn't care, and the town ate it up. "Brent's doing big things," people would say at the diner. "He's gonna make it out." I'd be standing right there and they'd still say it like I wasn't. At first I told myself it didn't matter. I had bigger goals, bigger vision, bigger patience. But then I noticed something that made my stomach go cold. Brent wasn't just taking credit, he was taking notes. Watching how I worked, asking questions that sounded innocent but weren't, getting access to documents he didn't need. Sitting in on calls he contributed nothing to. One night I walked into the office late to grab my laptop, and Brent was at my desk, scrolling. He snapped the screen shut like a teenager caught doing something dumb. "Oh hey," he said too fast, "just checking some stuff." I smiled, soft, calm. "No problem," I said. "It's a family operation, right?" He laughed, relieved, but inside I was already making adjustments. Because the moment you catch someone snooping, you don't confront them, you set a trap. I made to protect myself, and how Brent walked straight into my setup without even noticing. When you grow up overlooked, you learn how to move without making noise. You learn how to smile while people underestimate you. How to nod while they talk over you, how to let them believe they're the smartest person in the room, because the second they believe that, they stop watching their own hands. That night I caught Brent at my desk. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him, I didn't even look offended. I just walked out with my laptop like it didn't matter, because the truth is, it did matter, but not the way he thought. Brent believed he was getting away with something. I knew he was volunteering to expose himself. The next morning, I showed up early and made coffee like nothing happened. I sat at my workstation, opened my files, and started doing what I always did: building, improving, tightening the system. But behind the scenes, I started locking things down in ways Brent wouldn't notice until it was too late. I created separate access levels: clean, simple, professional, the kind of security any real company should have. Brent didn't question it because he didn't understand it. He thought passwords were just annoying speed bumps. I started keeping time-stamped records of every update, every feature, every line of code, every change request. I kept it all organized like a diary written in legal language. Then I did something even smarter. I let Brent keep thinking he was in control. Dad and Mom loved Brent's confidence. He'd walk into the office and announce things like he was a general planning a war. "We need bigger clients," he'd say. "We need more attention. We need to look like we're expanding." Dad would nod like Brent was a genius. Mom would bring lunch and act like we were a happy little empire. And me, I'd sit quietly, take notes, and ask questions in a calm voice, not because I needed their approval, because I needed information. See, people like Brent always reveal their intentions through what they demand. And Brent kept demanding the same thing over and over: access. He wanted the admin logins, the banking portals, the contract templates, the investor contacts. The patent paperwork. At first he asked politely, then he started acting like I was being difficult. One afternoon, he leaned against my doorframe with that fake friendly grin. "You don't have to guard everything like it's your secret little project," he said. "We're a team." I looked up at him and smiled softly. "It's not about guarding," I said. "It's about protecting the company." Brent rolled his eyes. Yeah, protecting, whatever." Then he walked off, muttering like I was just being dramatic. But I wasn't being dramatic. I was being prepared because I could feel something shifting. The company was growing. Real clients were signing on. Small businesses were paying monthly. The software was working. People were depending on it. And Brent was getting bolder. He started showing up later, leaving earlier, and taking meetings without telling me. He'd come back with vague updates like, "Don't worry, I handled it." Handled what? I didn't even ask, because I knew the more rope I gave him, the more he'd hang himself with it. Then came the night Dad invited me to dinner, just me. That should have felt special. It didn't. It felt like a setup. Dad sat across from me in the booth at our usual diner, the one where the waitress still called me sweetie like I was 12. He didn't touch his food much. He just kept looking at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't understand. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Listen," he said, "Brent's been saying some things." I kept my face neutral. "Like what?" Dad leaned in slightly. "He says you've been difficult, holding things back, making it hard for him to do his job." There it was, the narrative. I didn't react. I didn't defend myself like a child. I just nodded slowly like I was processing. "I see," I said calmly. Dad sighed like he was exhausted. "He's trying, okay? He's got big plans, we all do, and we can't have you slowing things down." Slowing things down. That was their favorite phrase when they wanted to blame me for their impatience. I took a sip of water and set the glass down carefully. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice soft, "what exactly is Brent trying to do?" Dad hesitated. "He wants to take the company to the next level, investors, bigger money, expansion." I nodded again. "And you trust him to handle that?" Dad's face tightened. "He's my son." There it was again, not the truth, just loyalty. And loyalty without wisdom is how families destroy themselves. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't try to convince him, I just said, "Okay." That word confused him more than any argument could have. Because people like my dad are used to resistance. They're used to fights they can win. But calm agreement, that scares them because it means you're not playing their game. A few days later, Brent invited me into the office conference room with Dad and Mom already seated. Lawyers were there too, 2 of them, sharp suits, briefcases, the kind of men who don't blink when families fall apart. Brent smiled like he was hosting a party. Dad folded his hands like he was about to deliver a sermon. Mom looked entertained. Brent slid a folder toward me. "We're restructuring," he said. "It's better this way, cleaner. You'll still be involved, of course, just not in control." I opened the folder. And right there in black and white was the beginning of the betrayal I'd been quietly preparing for. They wanted the patent. They wanted my signature. They wanted me to hand over the keys and smile while doing it. I looked up at them slowly. And I didn't show anger, I showed understanding, because the trap was already built. And Brent was already standing in the center of it. Brent didn't realize I had documented and why it turned his power move into the biggest mistake of his life. The folder Brent slid across the table looked ordinary, just clean pages, legal language, a few highlighted lines, the kind of paperwork that makes people feel important because it's boring and official at the same time. Dad leaned back like the decision was already made. Mom sat there with that little satisfied smile like she was watching a show she'd paid for. Brent tapped the folder with one finger, real casual. "It's simple," he said. "We're streamlining ownership. You'll still be part of the team, but the company needs a face, a leader. Investors want confidence." I didn't even blink because I already knew what this was. It wasn't streamlining, it was a takeover. And it wasn't about investors, it was about ego. I flipped through the pages slowly like I was reading carefully because I wasn't just scanning for numbers, I was scanning for intent. Then I saw it. A clause tucked into the middle like a hidden blade. It wasn't written in bold, it wasn't highlighted, it wasn't obvious, but it was there. A transfer of intellectual property rights, including the patent filings, including the underlying source code, including all derivative works. In plain language. They weren't just taking the company, they were taking my brain, and they wanted me to sign off like it was a favor. I looked up at Brent. His eyes were bright, excited, not nervous, not guilty. That's the scary part about people like him. They don't feel bad when they steal, they feel proud. "I'm not signing this," I said calmly. The air shifted. Dad's face tightened like I'd just embarrassed him in public. "Don't start," he warned. Mom gave a small laugh. "Oh my God, you're being dramatic." Brent's smile didn't disappear, but it got sharper. "Come on," he said. "Don't be like that, you'll still get paid." I set the folder down gently like I didn't want to crease the paper. "I built the patent," I said. "I built the product, I built the system." Brent shrugged. "You helped, sure." That word helped hit me harder than the firing ever did because it wasn't just disrespect, it was revision. It was him rewriting history while I was sitting right there. Dad leaned forward. "Enough," he said. "We're giving the money to Brent, he's the one who can lead this." I stared at him, not with anger, with clarity. "So you sold my patent," I said quietly. Mom laughed again, louder this time, like my pain was entertaining. "We sold our company," she said, almost singing it. "That's what families do, we make decisions together. Except nobody asked me, the lawyers stayed still, but I noticed something. One of them glanced at the other when Mom said sold. A tiny look. A professional look, the kind that says this is going to get messy. That's when I realized something important. Brent and my parents weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were doing something legally dangerous. Because while they were busy playing family business, Brent had been doing side deals. I didn't know the full details yet, but I'd seen enough little cracks to start connecting the dots. The late-night meetings he wouldn't explain, the contracts he handled, the investor calls he didn't include me on. The access requests that never stopped, so I did what I always do when someone tries to corner me. I asked a calm question that sounded harmless. "Who did you sell it to?" I said. Brent's eyes flicked away for half a second. Dad answered instead, "That's not your concern anymore." That told me everything, because if it was a clean deal, they would have bragged about it. If it was fair, they would have explained it. If it was legal, they would have welcomed questions. Brent leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was being reasonable. "Look," he said, "you're smart, okay, but you don't have the personality for this. People don't follow you, they follow me." I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, because I wanted him comfortable. "All right," I said, "let me take the folder home, I'll review it." Dad shook his head immediately. "No, you sign now." Brent's smile came back. "Yeah," he said, "right now." "We're done waiting." I sat there for a long moment, looking at the signatures already printed on the page. Dad's, Mom's, Brent's, they'd signed before I even walked into the room. They never wanted my agreement, they wanted my compliance. And that's when I saw the second hidden truth. The signature line for me wasn't labeled co-founder. It was labeled employee. Employee, they'd already demoted me on paper before the firing, before the meeting. Before I even had a chance to speak. And the craziest part, that single word made their entire plan weaker. Because if I was an employee, then Brent had been accessing protected development files without proper authorization. If I was an employee, then he'd been representing himself as the sole inventor to outsiders. If I was an employee, then he'd been lying, not just to me, to investors, to clients, to banks, to everyone. I looked at the lawyers again. One of them adjusted his pen slightly like he was suddenly more awake. I knew that look. That look said she's about to ask the right question, so I did, still calm, still controlled. Can I see the purchase agreement? I asked. Brent's smile froze, Dad's eyebrows lifted. Why? I tilted my head slightly. Because if you sold the company, there's a buyer, and if there's a buyer, there's a contract. I want to know what name you signed under. Brent swallowed just once. But I saw it, that tiny crack in his confidence, because the truth was he didn't just sell the company, he sold it using a story that wasn't true, and I was about to pull on the thread that would unravel everything. What I discovered about Brent's buyer and why it proved he wasn't just stealing from me, he was committing fraud in plain sight. The room got quiet after I asked to see the purchase agreement, not the normal kind of quiet. This was the kind of silence that happens when people realize you're not confused, you're calculating. Dad stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Mom's smile slipped for the first time all day. Brent's face stayed composed, but his eyes started moving fast, jittery, like he was scanning for an exit. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. We can provide documentation, he said carefully, professional to the bone. But it's not typical to. I'm not typical, I said calmly. Brent laughed, forced and thin. Why do you care? He asked. You're fired, remember? I nodded once. Exactly, I said. So there's no reason to hide anything from me. That hit harder than any insult, because he couldn't argue with it. Dad leaned forward again, voice heavy with authority he didn't actually earn. This is family business, he snapped. We don't owe you explanations. Mom chimed in like she was bored. You always have to make everything complicated. I looked at her and smiled softly. No, I said. I make things correct. The lawyer nearest to me reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin stack of papers. He didn't slide them to me, he held them like he was deciding whether giving them to me would start a fire. Brent cut in fast. We don't need to do this right now, he said. The deal's done. I tilted my head. Then the paperwork should be easy to show. That's the thing about liars, they hate simple requests. Because simple requests expose complicated lies, the lawyer finally placed the papers on the table. Dad's hand twitched like he wanted to snatch them back. Brent stared at them like they were a snake. I picked them up and read slowly. Not because I struggled, because I wanted them to feel the time passing, because time is pressure. The purchase agreement had a company name I'd never heard before, Blackridge Holdings Group. It sounded expensive, official, powerful. But the address listed. A P.O. box, not a headquarters, not an office suite. A P.O. box in a town 2 hours away. I kept my face calm, then I looked at the signature line, Buyer Representative B. Carter. I almost smiled. Because Brent's full name is Brent Carter, he didn't even bother to hide behind a different initial. He just dressed the lie up in a suit and expected everyone to clap. I set the papers down gently. So Brent, I said, voice steady, Blackridge Holdings is you. Brent's laugh came out too quick. What? No, that's ridiculous. Dad frowned. What are you talking about? I looked at Dad. I'm talking about the fact that Brent sold the company to himself. Mom blinked like she didn't understand. Why would he do that? I leaned back slightly, still composed. Because it creates the illusion of an acquisition, I said. A bigger buyer, a bigger valuation, bigger leverage. Brent's jaw tightened. You're reaching. I didn't raise my voice. Am I asked, then I pointed at the agreement. The buyer has no listed corporate registration number, I said. No board members, no operating address, no proof of funds attached. And the representative is B. Carter. Brent's hands were under the table, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Dad stared at the papers again like he was reading them for the first time because he hadn't actually understood what he signed. He'd trusted Brent, and Brent had used that trust like a weapon. Mom looked uncomfortable now, shifting in her chair. Brent, is that true? Brent slammed his palm lightly on the table, not hard enough to be dramatic, but hard enough to interrupt. You don't get it, he said. This is strategy, I nodded. No, I said, this is deception. The lawyers exchanged another glance, longer this time, the kind of glance that says we are officially in liability territory, but it got worse. Because the purchase agreement had a second section, future funding, Blackridge Holdings promised to invest a large amount into the company over the next 12 months. The number made my stomach drop, not because it was impressive. Because it was impossible. Brent didn't have that kind of money, Dad didn't either, and the company hadn't earned enough yet to justify it. So where was that funding supposed to come from? I already knew the answer before I found it. Loans, debt. And other people's trust? I scanned further down and there it was. A line referencing a pending investment commitment from an outside partner. The partner name was listed as Garrison Capital Partners, that one I recognized. Because 2 months earlier I'd gotten an email from a man claiming to represent Garrison. He'd asked questions about our product, about scalability, about ownership. At the time I thought it was just another investor sniffing around. But now it clicked. Brent had been pitching them behind my back, using my work as bait, and probably telling them he owned everything. I slowly placed the agreement back on the table and looked straight at Brent. You told them you were the inventor, I said. Brent scoffed. I'm the CEO. That's not what I said, I replied calmly. I said you told them you were the inventor. His silence was loud. Dad's voice cracked slightly. Brent, what did you do? Brent's eyes flashed with irritation. I did what I had to do, he snapped. We needed money, we needed growth, and he pointed at me like I was the problem. She was holding everything back with her control issues. Control issues. That was rich, coming from a man who forged an acquisition to look powerful. I turned to the lawyers. If Blackridge Holdings is a shell and Brent misrepresented ownership to investors, I said evenly, what does that mean? One lawyer swallowed. The other adjusted his glasses. It could mean, he began slowly, choosing his words like stepping through glass, potential fraud exposure. Mom's face went pale. Dad looked like someone had finally pulled the curtain back on the stage and he realized he'd been acting in a play he didn't understand. Brent sat back, trying to regain his swagger. Nobody's getting in trouble, he said. This is normal business. I smiled, small and calm. No, I said, what's normal is paperwork matching reality. Then I stood up, collected my bag, and looked at all three of them. Congratulations, I said softly. You didn't just fire me, you handed me proof. Brent laughed again, but this time it sounded scared. Proof of what? I looked him right in the eyes. Proof that you built your whole life on a lie, I said. And I walked out, not because I was defeated, because I had everything I needed. How I set my revenge plan in motion, quietly, legally, and so clean that Brent wouldn't realize he was collapsing until the room turned on him. I didn't go home and cry. I didn't drive around blasting music and pretending I was fine. I didn't even call a friend to vent. Because the second I walked out of that room, I understood something very clearly. Brent wasn't just arrogant, he was reckless. And reckless people always leave fingerprints. So I went straight to the only place I could think clearly, my little rental house on the edge of town, the one nobody visited because it wasn't nice enough for family dinners. I walked inside, kicked off my shoes, and sat at my kitchen table with nothing but my laptop in silence. Then I did what I always do when things get ugly. I organized. I opened a folder I'd been keeping for months. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I'd learned never to build anything without protecting it. Inside were time-stamped files, early prototypes, drafts, emails, client feedback, my original diagrams. Screenshots of system architecture. It wasn't dramatic, it was evidence. Then I opened another folder, the one I'd started the night I caught Brent at my desk. I labeled it something boring on purpose. Compliance. Inside that folder were access logs, permission changes, unusual login times, file exports, and download activity. Brent thought he was sneaky, but systems don't care about confidence. Systems record everything. I didn't need revenge that looked like revenge. I needed consequences that looked like reality. So I made a plan with 3 rules. Rule 1, everything legal. Rule 2, no yelling, no scenes. Rule 3, let Brent destroy himself publicly. Because the truth is, when you expose someone like Brent privately, they twist the story. But when you expose them in front of the exact people they lied to, they don't have room to breathe. The next morning, I made my first move. I called a patent attorney, not the same lawyers my dad hired. Their loyalty was to whoever paid them last. I called a woman named Denise, sharp voice, sharper mind. She didn't waste time with sympathy, she asked questions, good ones. When I explained what happened, she didn't gasp, she didn't act shocked, she just said, "Send me everything." So I did, every file, every date, every draft. Every message where Brent referred to my work like it was his. Then I made my second move. I called our biggest client, a family-owned distribution company that had been paying us consistently. They loved the product because it saved them money, and they trusted me because I was the one who actually fixed problems when they called. The owner, Mr. Haverson, answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said warmly. "We were just talking about you. Brent told us you're not with the company anymore." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "That's why I'm calling," I said calmly. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly." There was a pause. "What happened?" "I'm not here to gossip," I said. "I'm here to protect you." That got his attention. I explained just enough to make him cautious, not enough to sound emotional, just facts: ownership dispute, misrepresentation concerns. Pending legal review. Mr. Haverson didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "So, should we be worried?" "I think you should be careful," I said. "And I think you should request written confirmation of who owns the software and who is authorized to modify it." That was it. No drama, just a seed of doubt planted in the right soil. Then I made my third move. I emailed Garrison Capital Partners, not with accusations, not with threats, just a calm message from my personal email written like someone who belonged in the room. I said, "Hello, I'm reaching out regarding recent discussions about company name. I'm the original inventor and architect of the core product and patent filings. I'd like to ensure your team has accurate information before proceeding with any commitments. Please confirm a time for a brief call today, short, professional, unshakable." And here's the part Brent didn't realize: serious investors don't ignore messages like that. Especially not when they've been promised a clean acquisition. That afternoon, I got a reply, not from an assistant, from a partner. He said, "We can speak at 4:30. Thank you for reaching out." I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate. I just wrote back, "Confirmed," because I wasn't chasing victory, I was setting the stage. At 4:30, the partner asked me one question right away. "Are you saying Brent is not the inventor?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm saying I am," I replied. Then I backed it up: dates, documents, prototypes, filing drafts, version history. The partner stayed quiet for a long time, then he asked, "Why are you contacting us now?" I answered honestly, calm and controlled. "Because I believe you're being misled," I said, "and I'd rather you hear the truth before money moves." That was the moment the tone changed, because investors can handle risk, but they don't tolerate deception. After the call, I didn't wait. I made my fourth move. I filed a formal notice through Denise, my attorney, stating that any transfer of IP rights without my consent was disputed and that Brent's representations were under review. It wasn't a lawsuit. Not yet. It was a warning shot, clean, legal, documented. Then I made the final move for the week. I accepted an invitation Brent didn't know was coming. See, every year our town hosted a business and community leaders dinner. It was basically a fancy excuse for people to dress up and brag. And Brent lived for that kind of night. He'd already been telling everyone he was going to announce a major acquisition and new funding. He wanted applause, he wanted the spotlight, he wanted to look untouchable. So when the event coordinator called me and said, "We heard you might not be involved anymore, but we'd still love you there," I didn't hesitate. I said, "I'll be there." And right before I hung up, I added, "Also, I may have something important to share." That's when the coordinator got very polite. Very interested. Because small towns love two things: success stories and public downfalls. If you're enjoying this story so far, stay with me, because what happened at that dinner wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, and it wasn't messy, but it ended Brent's entire image in one night. What happened when Brent took the stage expecting applause, and I calmly handed the room the truth he couldn't outrun. The business and community leaders' dinner was held at the nicest place in town, which honestly wasn't saying much. It was a renovated barn-turned-event venue, with white string lights, fake candles on every table, and a buffet line that always ran out of the good food too early. The kind of place people went to so they could post pictures and pretend they were living bigger than they were. When I walked in, I could feel eyes on me, not warm eyes, curious eyes, judging eyes. The same people who ignored me at the diner now watched me like I was a plot twist. Brent was already there, working the room like a politician. He had on a suit that cost too much for someone who just closed a deal, and he was smiling so hard his face looked tired. Dad stood beside him, chest out, soaking in the attention like it was sunlight. Mom floated around in a dress she'd definitely bought just for this night, laughing too loud, touching arms, playing the role of proud business wife. And me? I wore something simple, clean, professional, nothing flashy because I wasn't there to compete. I was there to end the performance. I grabbed a water, found my seat near the back, and waited. That's the thing about revenge when you do it right. You don't rush it, you let the target walk into the moment thinking they're safe. A few minutes later, the event coordinator took the mic and welcomed everyone. People clapped like they were trained. Plates clinked. Chairs scraped. The room smelled like perfume and ambition. Then the coordinator smiled and said, "Tonight we're celebrating local innovation and growth, and we have a special announcement from one of our own, Brent Carter." The applause hit fast. Brent stood up like he'd been waiting for that moment his whole life. He straightened his jacket, shook hands like he was collecting votes, and walked to the stage with a grin that said, "Watch me win." I watched him step behind the podium and lean into the microphone like he owned it. "Thank you," he said, voice smooth. "It's an honor to be here. This town raised me, and I'm proud to say we're bringing big business home." People cheered. Dad smiled so wide it looked painful. Mom clapped like she was watching her favorite show. Brent continued. "As of this week, our company has officially been acquired by a major holding group, and we're entering a new phase of expansion." The room reacted like he'd just announced he was buying the whole town. Gasps, smiles, whispers. Brent held up his hand like a celebrity calming fans. "And that's not all," he said. "We also have new funding lined up from serious partners. This is just the beginning." I could see it in his eyes. He was high on attention, and that's when I stood up, not fast, not dramatic, just calm like I was walking to refill my water. The coordinator saw me moving and stiffened slightly. She knew. I'd warned her I had something important to share. I walked toward the side aisle, and right as Brent finished his sentence, the coordinator stepped forward and said, "Actually, before we continue, we have another voice we'd like to hear from tonight." Brent turned, confused. The applause slowed, unsure. The coordinator smiled politely. "Please welcome the original product architect and inventor behind the company's technology." The room went quiet. Brent's face froze. Dad's head snapped toward me. Mom's mouth opened slightly like she couldn't believe the show was changing without her permission. And then the coordinator said my name. I stepped onto the stage, and the second I took the microphone, I felt the room's energy shift. Because people expected a fight, they expected me to cry or accuse or make it personal. Instead, I smiled softly. "Good evening," I said, voice steady. "I'll keep this short." Brent stood off to the side, still holding his confident posture, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He was trying to look unbothered. He wasn't. I looked out at the crowd and continued. "I know many of you have heard exciting news tonight about an acquisition and upcoming funding," I said. "I'm here to confirm one thing. The technology this company is built on was created by me." A ripple moved through the audience. Not loud, but real. I didn't stop. "And because I care about this town and the businesses that trusted this product," I added, "I also need to clarify something important. There is an active dispute regarding ownership and representation." Dad stood up halfway, face red. "What are you doing?" he hissed. I didn't look at him yet. I stayed focused on the room. "Let me be clear," I said. "I'm not here to attack anyone. I'm here to protect the truth." Then I held up a printed page, not a stack, not a binder, just one clean sheet. Simple, because too much paper looks like drama, one page looks like certainty. "This," I said, "is the acquisition agreement that was referenced tonight." Brent stepped forward fast. "You can't do this," he whispered through a smile. I turned slightly, still calm. "Brent, please," I said into the mic, polite as can be. "Let's not interrupt." That line got a few quiet chuckles because the room could feel it now. His power was slipping. I looked back at the crowd. "The buyer listed is Blackridge Holdings Group," I said. "A holding group represented by B. Carter," the room murmured. I didn't need to explain the obvious. People can do math. Then I delivered the cleanest punch of the night. "If anyone here is considering partnerships, investments, or business agreements based on tonight's announcement," I said, "I strongly recommend you request verified corporate registration, proof of funds, and confirmed intellectual property ownership before proceeding." That was it. No yelling, no insults, just professional caution. the kind that destroys confidence instantly because confidence is what Brent sold, and now the room didn't trust it. Brent grabbed the mic stand like he was steadying himself. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly, trying to regain control. "She's upset because she got fired. This is personal." I turned and faced him fully now, still calm. "No," I said, voice smooth. "This is documented." And right then the side door opened. Two men walked in, not police, not security, worse, one was from Garrison Capital Partners. I recognized him immediately from the video call. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, and disappointed investors are more dangerous than angry ones. The second man with him carried a folder and wore the kind of expression you see on someone who's about to cancel a deal without emotion. The Garrison partner didn't even look at me first. He looked straight at Brent. And he said loud enough for the room to hear, "Brent, we need to talk now." Brent's face drained. Dad's knees looked like they might give out. Mom's hand went to her mouth like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. I stepped back from the microphone and let the silence do the rest, because when you expose someone like Brent, you don't need to keep speaking. Their own collapse becomes the headline. And as Brent stumbled off the stage trying to smile through humiliation, the room did what crowds always do when they sense a shift in power. They turned away from him. People stopped clapping, stopped smiling, stopped believing. And for the first time in his life, Brent wasn't the golden boy. He was the cautionary tale. What happened after the dinner, when my parents finally faced what they'd done? Brent lost everything he built on lies, and I got the kind of justice that doesn't need revenge to feel satisfying. After the dinner, the town didn't explode. It shifted. That's how it happens in small places. Nobody wants to admit they were fooled, so they pretend they always had a weird feeling about the person who just fell. People don't like being wrong, they like being right late. By the next morning, Brent's name was moving through the community like smoke, not in a loud way, in a careful, whispered way. He really sold it to himself. I heard investors showed up. Did you see his face? His sister was calm as ice. And that part made me smile, because for years the story had been Brent the leader, Brent the future, Brent the star. But the truth finally had a microphone, and it spoke in my voice. Brent didn't call me that night. Dad did. His number popped up on my screen while I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee like it was a normal Tuesday. I stared at it for a second, then I answered. "Hello," I said. His voice was tight, shaky in a way I'd never heard before. "What did you do?" I didn't react emotionally. I didn't gloat. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I told the truth." He swallowed hard. "You embarrassed us." I let that sit there for a beat, then I said, "No, Brent embarrassed you, you just didn't want to see it." Silence, the kind that hurts. Dad's voice dropped. "Your mother is upset." I almost laughed, but I didn't. "She laughed when you fired me," I said, "so she can sit with being upset." He didn't argue, because he couldn't. The next call came from Denise, my attorney. Her voice was calm, efficient, almost satisfied. "We have confirmation that Blackridge Holdings is not a registered operating entity," she said. "It's a shell structure. Brent's paper trail is sloppy." I closed my eyes for a second, breathing slow, not because I was relieved, because I was steady. "What happens next?" I asked. Denise didn't sugarcoat it. "Garrison has pulled their commitment. They're also requesting reimbursement for due diligence expenses. Your company's bank is reviewing loan exposure. Brent's credibility is damaged." Damaged, that was a gentle word for what was happening. Because what Brent lost wasn't just money, it was his favorite currency, trust. And in business, once you lose trust, you don't just lose deals, you lose oxygen. Over the next week, things unraveled fast. Clients started emailing for clarity. Some paused payments until ownership was confirmed. A few demanded their data be exported immediately. People weren't angry at me, they were angry they'd been played. And Brent? He tried to fix it the only way he knew how, by talking. He called people, he spun stories, he blamed me, but now the town had seen him sweat under bright lights. They'd seen him interrupted by real investors. They'd watched his confidence crack like cheap glass. No speech could patch that. 2 days later, I got a text from Mom, just 3 words. "Come to dinner." No apology, no accountability. Just an order, like I was still 12 and expected to obey. I didn't respond, not because I was scared, because I'd finally learned something important. You don't heal in the same room where you were broken. That night, Dad showed up at my door, not in a suit, not as the big man of the family, just a tired older guy standing on my porch like he didn't know where his power went. I opened the door halfway. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "I didn't know," he said quietly. I nodded once. "I know you didn't." His face tightened. "You thought Brent was you," I cut in softly. "You thought he was your second chance." Dad flinched like that landed, because it was true. He didn't just love Brent, he needed Brent to win, because if Brent won, Dad could pretend he'd built something perfect. And I didn't fit that fantasy. I was too quiet, too independent, too real. Dad stared down at the porch boards. "I was wrong," he said. That was the first time I'd ever heard him say it. Not maybe, not "I'm sorry you feel that way." Wrong. I let the silence stretch long enough to mean something, then I said, "I didn't want revenge, Dad, I wanted respect." He nodded slowly. "You deserved it." Inside the house, my phone buzzed again, an email from Garrison Capital Partners. It was short, professional, and final. They confirmed they would not proceed with any involvement under Brent's representation. But then there was a second line, a line that felt like justice without noise. They wanted to speak with me directly about the technology, not because I begged, not because I shouted, because the truth had a way of standing up on its own. Over the next month, everything became official. The disputed transfer was halted. The patent filings were protected under my documentation. The company name my parents had tried to sell like a family heirloom, it stopped being theirs to play with. And Brent didn't go to jail. This wasn't that kind of story. But he lost what mattered most to him, his image. No more big meetings, no more handshakes, no more future CEO talk at the diner. Just a guy sitting in the same town with the same last name and nobody left to believe him. As for Mom, she never apologized. Not really. She tried to rewrite it like she always did. "Well, maybe this is for the best," she said one day when I ran into her at the grocery store. I looked at her and smiled politely. "It is," I said, "for me." Then I walked away, because closure doesn't always come with hugs and tears. Sometimes closure is simply not needing their approval anymore. A few weeks later, I stood in my old garage, the one where this all started. The same place I'd been ignored, dismissed, and underestimated. And I realized something that hit me deep. They didn't take my power when they fired me, they revealed it. They showed me I could lose everything they thought mattered and still be standing. Still calm, still capable, still ahead. So here's the moral, the one I'll never forget. Quiet strength always wins, so never underestimate someone who stays low, works hard, and keeps building while you're busy laughing.